The glass walls of Hale Enterprises towered over New York City like a monument of power. Inside, the 38th floor buzzed with the low hum of executives moving quickly, interns carrying files, and secretaries clicking away at their keyboards. Everyone knew this was the kingdom of Richard Hale, the man whose name dominated financial headlines almost weekly. Richard stood by the window of his corner office, his sharp gray suit tailored perfectly to his lean, athletic frame. The city stretched beneath him, but his mind was focused on the man sitting nervously in front of his desk, Thomas Miller. Thomas looked older than his 55 years, with lines of worry carved deep into his face. His hands twisted together as he sat on the leather chair, his eyes darting around the sleek office as though searching for an escape. "Thomas," Richard began, his voice calm, deep, and cutting. "You've come to me 3 times in the last 6 months. Each time, you've begged for extensions. Each time, I've granted them. But the truth is, your debt is drowning you. And no one else will save you." Thomas swallowed hard. I know, Richard. I wouldn't be here if there was any other way. I knew your father. He was a good man. He would have." Richard cut him off, his jaw tightening at the mention of his father. "My father isn't here. I am. And I don't run this company on nostalgia." The silence in the office stretched. The only sound was the ticking of a modern clock on the wall. Then Richard turned from the window and sat down, folding his hands on the polished desk. "I'll erase your debt," he said finally. Thomas's eyes widened. "You will?" His voice cracked, the hint of hope almost too fragile to touch. "Yes," Richard said smoothly. "But I want something in return." Thomas froze. "Money. My business." "Richard, I have nothing left." Richard's gray eyes sharpened like steel. "I don't want your money. I want your daughter." The words crashed into the room like thunder. Thomas's jaw dropped. "Elena, you can't be serious." Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I'm very serious. Marry her to me, and I'll clear your debts. Permanently." At the Miller House, Ohio. That evening, in a small suburban home in Ohio, Elena Miller sat at the kitchen table, tapping her pencil against a stack of books. At 21, she had just graduated from a small liberal arts college, full of dreams of pursuing art therapy for children. Her long chestnut hair fell over her shoulder as she sketched idly in the margins of her notebook. Her father walked in, his shoulders slumped, his face pale. Elena looked up immediately. "Dad, what happened? Did something go wrong at work again?" Thomas hesitated, staring at his daughter, the only light in his otherwise failing life. She had her mother's hazel eyes, soft but fierce when needed. She deserved the world. Instead, he had given her nothing but a pile of debts and disappointment. "Elena," he said slowly, sitting across from her, There's something I need to tell you, and you're not going to like it." Her stomach twisted. "What is it?" "I went to see Richard Hale today." She frowned. "The CEO? The man who practically owns half of Manhattan?" Thomas nodded miserably. "Yes. He made an offer. One I couldn't refuse." Elena leaned forward, her voice sharp with suspicion. "What kind of offer?" He closed his eyes before whispering, "He said he'll erase all my debts. Every last dollar. But only if you marry him." The world seemed to still around her. Her pencil slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the table. "What?" Her voice was barely audible. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "I know how it sounds. But Elena, I don't have another way. The bank is taking everything. Our house, my business, everything your mother worked so hard for. I'm sorry, baby girl. I'm so sorry." Elena pushed back her chair, her heart pounding. "You promised me you'd fix this, Dad. You promised me I wouldn't have to sacrifice everything for your mistakes." "I know," Thomas whispered brokenly. "I know. But Richard Hale, he's powerful. He can protect you. And maybe he'll treat you better than I did. The first meeting. 2 days later, Elena found herself standing inside Hale Enterprises. The marble lobby gleamed under the golden lights, and men in dark suits moved briskly around, carrying documents and talking into earpieces. She felt completely out of place in her simple white dress, her nerves twisting her insides. When the elevator doors opened to the 38th floor, she stepped out into a different world. A secretary with a sharp bob haircut gestured toward Richard's office. "Mr. Hale is expecting you." Elena walked in, her palms clammy. Richard Hale stood behind his desk, tall and imposing, with an aura that made her knees weak. He looked at her as though he were appraising an investment. "Elena Miller," he said smoothly. "So you're the daughter." She lifted her chin despite the fear in her chest. "And you're the man who thinks he can buy people like property." A flicker of amusement crossed his face, though his eyes remained cold. "Sharp tongue. Good. You'll need it." "I'm not marrying you," Elena snapped. "You don't have a choice," Richard replied calmly, walking around his desk until he stood directly in front of her. "Your father owes me millions. If you walk away, he loses everything. If you marry me, I erase it all." Her throat tightened, tears threatening to fall. "Why me? You could have anyone. You're rich, powerful, handsome. Why would you want me?" For the first time, Richard's expression softened, though just slightly. "Because you're not from this world. You're untouched by it. I need that. And maybe, in a way, you need me too." Elena shook her head, her voice breaking. "You're a stranger. You'll learn," Richard said simply. Then he extended his hand, as though closing a deal. "So, Elena, do we have an agreement?" Her hazel eyes burned with fury and despair. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she placed her hand in his. And just like that, her fate was sealed. The wedding was nothing short of a spectacle. Richard Hale's name alone ensured the event made headlines across New York. The ceremony was held at a grand cathedral on Fifth Avenue, with stained glass windows that threw colored light over rows of high society guests. Photographers snapped relentlessly outside, eager to capture the ruthless billionaire CEO and his mysterious young bride. But for Elena Miller, the entire affair felt like a performance she had been forced into. Her ivory gown shimmered under the golden chandeliers, but her heart was heavy. She had imagined her wedding day since she was a girl in Ohio, dreaming of love, of laughter, of being chosen for who she was. Instead, she stood at the altar, her hand trembling in the grip of a man she barely knew. Richard, in his sharp black tuxedo, looked as composed as ever. To the guests, he radiated confidence and power. But when his gray eyes slid briefly to Elena's, she saw nothing but steel. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the priest declared. The applause echoed like thunder in her ears. Richard leaned in, brushing his lips briefly against hers. It was the coldest kiss Elena had ever imagined. The cameras flashed wildly, capturing the moment that would be splashed across newspapers by morning. The penthouse. That night, Richard brought Elena to his penthouse on the Upper East Side. The elevator doors opened to reveal sleek marble floors, towering windows, and minimalist furniture in shades of gray and black. Elena stepped inside slowly, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The city skyline glittered through the glass walls, but the space felt sterile, like a cage. Richard set his cufflinks on a tray and loosened his tie. "This is home now," he said, his voice flat. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, her wedding gown replaced by a simple white dress. "It doesn't feel like home," she whispered. He glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "Home is what you make of it. You'll adjust." The words stung. She turned toward the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Cars moved like tiny ants below. The city was alive, pulsing, but she had never felt more alone. After a long silence, she asked softly, "Why me, Richard? You could have married someone from your world. Someone who wouldn't look so lost here." Richard poured himself a glass of scotch, his movements slow, deliberate. I didn't want someone from my world. I wanted someone untouched by it. You're different, Elena. That makes you useful. Her chest tightened. Useful. Like a pawn in your business. He didn't deny it. Consider this a partnership. I provide stability and security. You provide presence. Presence. Her voice cracked. Richard sipped his drink, unfazed. You'll accompany me to events, play the role of Mrs. Hale. That's all that's required. Elena's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. And what about a marriage? A real one? Love. Affection. His gaze met hers, cool and unwavering. Don't expect romance. This isn't a fairy tale. This marriage is a transaction, nothing more. Understand. The lonely night. Later that night, Elena sat by the window in their massive bedroom. She hugged her knees to her chest, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. She thought of her father back in Ohio, relieved now that his debts were cleared, sleeping soundly while she paid the price. Richard sat at the desk across the room, flipping through documents as if nothing had changed in his life. His lamp cast a golden circle over contracts and financial reports. Finally, Elena broke the silence. Do you ever feel lonely, Richard? He didn't look up. Loneliness is a weakness. I don't indulge it. She studied him, the rigid posture, the way his jaw clenched as he read. There was no softness in him, no trace of warmth. He was a man built of glass and steel, untouchable. Maybe that's why you're so cold, she murmured under her breath. His pen paused mid-signature. Slowly, he lifted his gaze to her. Careful, Elena. Her heart skipped, but she held his eyes. What if I can't live like this? What if I can't pretend? Richard leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. Then you'll have to learn. This was your choice. Her voice broke. No, it was my father's choice. You just made sure I had no way out. For a fleeting moment, something flickered in Richard's eyes. Guilt, maybe, or hesitation. But just as quickly, it was gone. Go to bed, Elena, he said quietly, turning back to his papers. She stared at him for a long moment, then slipped beneath the covers, her body trembling. The sheets smelled of linen and cologne, but the bed felt vast and empty. Richard didn't join her. Understand. The morning after. The next morning, Elena woke to sunlight spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The other side of the bed was untouched. Richard had never laid down. She found him in the dining area, already dressed in a fresh suit, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. Good morning, she said softly, her voice still groggy. Morning, he replied curtly without looking up. Elena sat across from him, picking at the breakfast laid out by the housekeeper. Croissants, eggs, fresh fruit, food that looked beautiful but tasted like ash in her mouth. Finally, she asked, "What will people say about us?" Richard put down his phone, his gray eyes locking onto hers. They'll say what I tell them to say. Appearances matter more than truth. If we look the part, no one will question it. And if I fail? She asked, her voice trembling. His gaze sharpened. Then you'll embarrass me. And I don't tolerate embarrassment, Elena. The warning in his tone sent a chill down her spine. She lowered her eyes, silent. Richard pushed back his chair, standing tall. You'll come with me to a gala tonight. Consider it your introduction to this world. Dress appropriately. Smile when needed. And keep your head high. Without waiting for her reply, he left the room, his footsteps echoing against the marble. Elena sat frozen, her fork untouched on the plate. She felt like a bird in a gilded cage, trapped, displayed, and stripped of freedom. But deep inside, a small fire sparked. If Richard Hale thought she would remain a silent pawn forever, he was wrong. The black limousine slid to a stop in front of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, its towering steps lit up by chandeliers and camera flashes. It was the annual Winter Charity Gala, the kind of event where New York's most powerful families rubbed shoulders, whispered deals, and showed off fortunes. Inside the car, Elena sat stiffly in her navy blue gown, her hands clenched together on her lap. Richard had chosen the dress for her. It clung elegantly to her figure, the silk fabric glimmering under the city lights. Yet she felt like she was wearing a costume, one she didn't belong in. Richard, sitting beside her in a sleek black tuxedo, looked as composed as ever. He didn't glance at her as he spoke. "When we step out, there will be cameras. You'll smile. You'll hold my arm. And no matter what happens inside, you won't falter. Understood?" Elena's stomach churned. "And if I do?" His gray eyes finally met hers, sharp and unyielding. "Then you'll embarrass me. And I don't forgive easily." The word stung, but Elena lifted her chin. She wouldn't let him, or anyone, see how terrified she was. The chauffeur opened the door. Richard stepped out first, tall and commanding. When Elena placed her hand in his, he pulled her close to his side, guiding her toward the flashing cameras. "Mr. Hale, over here." "Richard, who's your wife?" "Elena, smile this way." The questions bombarded them, but Richard's expression never faltered. Elena forced a polite smile, clutching his arm as they walked up the grand steps into the glittering gala. Among sharks. Inside, crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of champagne. Wealthy guests in gowns and tuxedos mingled, their laughter echoing against marble walls. Elena felt dozens of eyes on her, the mysterious young woman who had suddenly become Richard Hale's wife. Whispers trailed behind her like smoke. "Who is she? She looks so ordinary. Small-town girl, I heard. Hale must be bored with socialites." Her cheeks burned, but she kept her posture straight, remembering Richard's warning. Richard introduced her briefly to senators, CEOs, and socialites, his tone polite but clipped. Elena smiled, shook hands, and nodded, though her heart pounded wildly. Then came Veronica Steele. Tall, stunning, and draped in a silver gown, Veronica exuded confidence. She had been Richard's longtime companion before Elena ever entered the picture, and everyone in the room knew it. "Well, well," Veronica purred, her red lips curving into a smirk as she approached. "So this is the new Mrs. Hale." Elena offered a polite smile. "It's nice to meet you." Veronica's eyes swept over her, head to toe. "Lovely dress. Did Richard pick it for you?" He always did have particular taste. Richard's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, a waiter passed by with wine. Elena, nervous and distracted, reached for a glass, only for her hand to bump against Veronica's. The glass tipped, red wine splashing across Veronica's shimmering gown. The room fell silent. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Veronica looked down at the stain, her expression twisting into theatrical outrage. "Oh my," she drawled loudly. "How clumsy of you." Elena froze, horror flooding her. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean." Veronica's laugh rang sharp and cruel. "Oh, don't worry, darling. I'm sure you'll get used to handling fine things eventually. Though, judging from your background, I suppose wine glasses are a little advanced." A murmur of laughter spread through the guests. Elena's eyes stung with humiliation. The car ride home. Richard's hand clamped firmly on Elena's arm. Without a word, he guided her out of the ballroom, through the whispers and stares, down the marble steps, and into the waiting limousine. The door slammed shut. Silence stretched inside the car, thick and suffocating. Elena kept her gaze on her trembling hands, shame crawling up her skin. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice sharp as a blade. "You embarrassed me." Her head snapped up, her hazel eyes burning. "It was an accident. She provoked me, and you know it. You think excuses matter in that world?" His tone was cold. "One mistake, Elena. That's all it takes for them to devour you." Tears blurred her vision. "I didn't ask for this world. I didn't ask to marry you." You dragged me into it and expect me to perform like one of your employees." Richard leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "You're my wife now. That means you'll adapt. You'll learn. Or you'll be crushed." Her chest heaved as she glared at him. "Maybe I'd rather be crushed than turned into one of them." For the first time, Richard faltered. The fire in her eyes, the raw defiance, it shook him. She wasn't like Veronica, or any of the other polished women in his circle. She wasn't pretending. She was real. He leaned back slowly, his expression unreadable. "Careful, Elena. That temper of yours might destroy you." Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "Or maybe it'll be the only thing that saves me." Cracks in the ice. The car fell silent again, but something had shifted. Richard turned his gaze to the window, but he couldn't shake the image of Elena's flushed cheeks, her blazing eyes, her trembling voice filled with both pain and strength. When they arrived back at the penthouse, Elena went straight to the bedroom, slamming the door shut. Richard remained in the living room, pouring himself another glass of scotch. He told himself she was just a pawn, a solution to a debt. But as the night wore on, and her words echoed in his mind, Richard realized something unsettling. For the first time in years, someone had stood up to him, not with power, not with wealth, but with unyielding honesty. And it stirred something in him he wasn't ready to face. The days after the gala were thick with silence. Elena avoided Richard as much as possible in their massive penthouse. She ate breakfast after he left for work and slipped into bed long after he had retreated to his study. The humiliation from that night still burned inside her, but it wasn't just Veronica Steele's cruelty, it was Richard's coldness afterward. She had expected at least a shred of defense, some word of protection. Instead, he had treated her like a liability. But as much as she tried to harden her heart, she couldn't escape him. Richard Hale's presence filled every corner of the penthouse, every thought in her mind. An unexpected glimpse. One afternoon, Elena wandered into the kitchen. The housekeeper had the day off, leaving the space unusually quiet. She decided to make herself something simple, just a cup of tea. Standing at the counter, she hummed softly, the sound unguarded, something she used to do back home in Ohio when mornings were warm and carefree. She poured hot water into a mug, her hazel eyes soft as she watched the steam rise. Richard's voice startled her. "I didn't know you could cook." She spun around, nearly dropping the kettle. He stood in the doorway, tie loosened, jacket off, watching her with a curious expression. "I wasn't cooking," she said quickly. "Just tea." He stepped inside, his hands in his pockets. Most women in this city wouldn't be caught dead in their own kitchens. They'd call the staff for tea. Elena raised her chin slightly. "Well, I'm not most women in this city." For a brief second, Richard's lips curved, almost into a smile. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. The rainy night. That evening, the sky opened up with heavy rain. Thunder rumbled across Manhattan, the city lights blurred through the downpour. Richard came home late, his suit damp at the edges. Elena was curled on the couch, a blanket over her legs, a book resting in her hands. She had fallen asleep, her head tilted against the cushions, strands of hair falling across her face. Richard paused at the sight. Something unfamiliar tugged at his chest. She looked so peaceful, vulnerable, completely unlike the sharp-tongued girl who had defied him in the car days ago. For a long moment, he simply stood there, watching her. Then, almost reluctantly, he stepped closer and carefully slid the book from her hands. He adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, his touch unusually gentle. Her lips parted slightly in sleep, and he found himself lingering, his gray eyes softening in a way no one else had ever seen. Without thinking, he whispered, "You don't belong in my world. And yet, here you are." The morning after. Elena woke the next morning in her bed, confused. She remembered falling asleep on the couch, but somehow she had been moved. For a moment, she wondered, had Richard carried her? The thought made her chest tighten in ways she didn't want to admit. She found him in the dining area, already sipping coffee. "Did you move me last night?" she asked cautiously. Richard didn't look up from his tablet. "You were asleep. The couch isn't comfortable." Her brows knit. "That was kind of you." Finally, his eyes flicked to hers, cool but unreadable. "Don't mistake consideration for kindness, Elena. I don't want a sick wife." The sharpness of his words stung, but she caught the faintest flicker of something else in his gaze. Something he wasn't ready to admit. The secretary's mistake. Later that week, Elena decided to visit Richard's office unannounced. She was tired of being caged in the penthouse, her only company the housekeeper and silence. When she arrived at Hale Enterprises, his secretary, a young woman named Amanda, looked startled. "Mrs. Hale, you didn't have an appointment." "I'm not here for business," Elena said gently. "I just wanted to bring him lunch." "He never eats properly, does he?" Amanda blinked, then glanced nervously at Richard's closed office door. "He doesn't like interruptions." Elena smiled faintly. "I'll take the risk." She knocked softly, then entered. Richard sat behind his enormous desk, papers spread before him. He looked up, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Elena, what are you doing here? I thought you might be hungry." She held up a small bag, her cheeks warming. "I made sandwiches." For a long moment, he just stared at her, as though the idea of someone caring enough to make him food was foreign. Then, slowly, he set down his pen. "You made these?" She nodded. "I told you, I'm not like the women in your world. Back home, people cook for each other. It's normal." Richard leaned back, studying her. Finally, he gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit." They ate together in silence at first, the tension in the room unusual but not unwelcome. When Amanda entered briefly with documents, her eyes widened at the sight of her boss sharing sandwiches with his wife. Richard ignored her surprise. The unexpected laugh. As Elena told a small story about her childhood, how she once tried to rescue a stray kitten from a tree and ended up stuck there until the fire department came, Richard actually chuckled. The sound startled her. "You can laugh," she teased softly. His lips twitched. "Don't get used to it." But the warmth in his eyes betrayed him. For the first time, Elena felt a crack in his icy exterior. A subtle shift. That night, back at the penthouse, Richard poured himself a drink while Elena sat by the fire, sketching idly. The silence between them wasn't hostile anymore. It was comfortable, almost fragile. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice low. "You don't have to try so hard, Elena." She looked up, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "This life. These people. You'll never fit in with them. But maybe, that's not a bad thing." Her breath caught. It was the closest he had come to a compliment. For the first time since their wedding, Elena felt something stir inside her chest. Not love, not yet, but the faintest glimmer of possibility. And Richard, sipping his scotch, realized with quiet unease that the young woman he had married out of convenience was beginning to matter to him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The first cracks in Richard's icy facade had left Elena both unsettled and strangely hopeful. For days afterward, she found herself replaying the sound of his quiet laugh, the warmth in his eyes as they ate sandwiches in his office. But hope was fragile, and the world outside their penthouse was merciless. The magazine cover. On a crisp Friday morning, Elena sat at the dining table, idly flipping through the day's mail. A glossy magazine slid free from the pile, and her stomach dropped at the sight of the cover. Richard Hale spotted with Mystery Girl, who really belongs in his bed. The photo was unmistakable. Richard leaving the gala, Veronica Steele clutching his arm possessively. Elena's name wasn't even mentioned. Instead, the article speculated that Veronica was his true companion, and Elena was just a debt-bound arrangement. Her fingers trembled as she turned the page. Paparazzi shots followed, Richard and Veronica talking outside his office building, sitting too close at a charity dinner months before. The story twisted the narrative until it looked as if Elena was nothing more than an inconvenient shadow. "Is this what they think of me?" she whispered, her throat tight. When Richard entered moments later, adjusting his cufflinks, she shoved the magazine across the table. "Explain this." His gray eyes flicked to the cover, then back to her. Controlled. Tabloids. They thrive on scandal. Scandal. Elena's voice cracked. "It makes me look like a fool. Like I don't even exist." Richard exhaled, his jaw tightening. "You care too much about what they say." Her hazel eyes burned. "Of course I care. You might not notice, but I walk into a room and they all look at me like I don't belong. And now this. You don't even defend me." For the first time, Richard faltered. The sight of her tears cut deeper than he expected. He reached for the magazine, his fingers tightening on it until the glossy pages crumpled. "I'll handle it," he said quietly. But Elena turned away, her chest aching. The dinner ambush. That weekend, Richard insisted they attend a private dinner hosted by one of his longtime business partners. Elena wanted to refuse, but he was unyielding. "They'll expect my wife," he said simply. The moment they arrived, whispers rippled through the crowd. Elena felt the weight of every gaze. Veronica Steele was there too, draped in a crimson gown, her smile sharp as a blade. "Well, if it isn't the Hales," Veronica purred as she approached. Her eyes swept over Elena with thinly veiled disdain. "Elena, darling, I saw the article. You mustn't take it to heart. Everyone knows the press exaggerates." Elena forced a polite smile. "It didn't feel exaggerated." Veronica leaned closer, her voice a mock whisper. "Richard deserves someone who can truly stand by his side. This world isn't kind to outsiders." Richard's jaw flexed. He placed his hand firmly on Elena's waist, pulling her closer. "Veronica," he said, his voice low and edged with steel, "my wife doesn't need your advice. She belongs here, because she belongs with me." The words stunned Elena almost as much as they silenced Veronica. For the first time, Richard had openly claimed her. But the night wasn't over. The confrontation. Later, as guests mingled with champagne in hand, Veronica cornered Richard near the terrace. Elena wasn't far, hidden by a cluster of tall plants, her heart pounding as she overheard. "You can't be serious," Veronica hissed. "This marriage, she's dragging you down. Do you know how people laugh behind your back?" Richard's reply was calm but dangerous. "I don't make decisions based on gossip. She's wrong for you. I've known you for years, Richard. You and I, we fit. She's nothing but enough." His voice cut like ice. "You don't speak about her that way." There was a beat of stunned silence. Then Richard added, lower, "You may have been useful once, Veronica. But if you continue this, you'll find yourself very far from my circle." Elena pressed a hand to her mouth, her chest tight with a rush of emotions. Richard wasn't defending her for appearances. He was protecting her. The quiet ride home. The car ride back to the penthouse was cloaked in silence. Elena stared out the window, the city lights streaking by, her heart still racing from what she'd overheard. Finally, she turned to him. "Why did you do that?" Richard's brows furrowed. "Do what?" "Defend me." In front of her. In front of everyone. For a moment, his eyes softened. Then he looked away. Because you're my wife. And no one humiliates my wife. The words struck deeper than he intended. Elena's throat tightened, her chest aching with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. She whispered, "Thank you." Richard didn't respond, but his hand shifted slightly on the seat between them, as if he had almost reached for hers, before stopping himself. The paparazzi storm. The next morning, the headlines had changed. Richard Hale defends wife against socialite rival. A power couple united? Photos from the dinner spread across the internet. Richard's protective hand on Elena's waist, the intensity in his eyes as he looked at her. For once, the narrative wasn't mocking. It was intrigued. Elena sat at the breakfast table, staring at the images. When Richard entered, she held one up. "Looks like you've started a war." He glanced at the photo, then at her. "I fought bigger wars." Her lips twitched despite herself. "And won them." A rare flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Always." The unspoken shift. That evening, as rain pattered softly against the penthouse windows, Elena sat sketching again while Richard worked nearby. The atmosphere was different now, less like strangers trapped in the same cage, more like two people cautiously circling the same fire. Finally, Richard set his papers aside. "Elena," he said slowly, "you'll need to grow stronger if you're going to survive in my world. But you don't have to face it alone." Her heart skipped. It wasn't quite tenderness, but it was something. She looked up at him, her voice quiet but steady. "Then teach me how." Their eyes held for a long moment. For once, neither looked away. The morning after the dinner party, the air in the penthouse felt different. Not lighter, not completely warm, but different. For the first time, Elena didn't wake up to silence. She stirred to the faint scent of coffee and the low rustle of pages turning. Padding into the kitchen in her robe, she froze when she saw Richard at the counter, pouring 2 mugs of coffee. He glanced up briefly. "You take it with sugar, right?" Elena blinked. "You remembered." "I don't forget details," he replied evenly, sliding a mug toward her. It was such a small gesture, but it made her chest ache in a way she couldn't explain. A moment of closeness. Later that day, Richard suggested they take a walk through Central Park. Elena nearly refused. He hated public attention, and she dreaded the stairs, but something in his tone made her relent. The park was crisp with autumn colors. Richard walked beside her, hands in his coat pockets, his usual aura of control intact. But as a child ran past and nearly collided with Elena, Richard's hand instinctively caught her elbow, steadying her. "You should be careful," he murmured. She looked up at him, her heart skipping. "You sounded almost worried." He arched a brow. "Would you prefer indifference?" Elena shook her head, biting back a smile. "No. I think I prefer this." Richard's lips twitched. Almost a smile, almost. They found a bench by the pond. For a rare moment, Richard seemed at ease, his gaze softening as he watched ducks glide across the water. "You used to draw," he said suddenly. Elena turned, surprised. "How do you know that?" "I've seen the sketches in your room." His voice was casual, but his eyes weren't. "You're good. Better than you realize." A flush crept up her neck. "It's just a hobby." "Hobbies reveal more than professions," Richard said quietly. "Your drawings, they have heart." Elena swallowed hard, struck by the rare compliment. No one, not even her late father, had spoken about her art that way. The almost kiss. That evening, back at the penthouse, Elena lingered in the living room sketching. Richard emerged from his office, loosening his tie. For once, He didn't retreat upstairs. Instead, he poured himself a drink and leaned against the counter, watching her. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She hesitated, then turned the pad toward him. It was a rough sketch of the city skyline from their window, but softened, romanticized with strokes of warmth the real city rarely offered. Richard studied it for a long moment. "You make even steel and concrete look alive." Elena laughed softly. "That's the point of art, to see what others miss." Their eyes held, something unspoken crackling between them. Richard moved closer, his steps deliberate. He stopped just a breath away, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before meeting her eyes again. Elena's heart pounded. For a moment, she thought, hoped, he might kiss her. But then he pulled back slightly, clearing his throat. "It's late. Get some rest." The air between them was charged as he left the room. Elena pressed a hand to her chest, her pulse racing. She had never been more confused, or more drawn to him. The letter. Days later, a package arrived for Elena. No return address. Inside was a single envelope, old and worn. Her heart froze when she saw the familiar handwriting. It was her father's. Hands trembling, she unfolded the letter. "Elena, if you are reading this, then the world has turned crueler than I hoped. I made mistakes that left me indebted to Richard Hale. Protect yourself, my daughter. Trust no one, not even those who claim to save you." Her breath caught. The words blurred. Her father had written this before he died, and he had known about Richard. "Elena!" Richard's voice startled her. He entered the room, his expression sharp as he noticed the letter in her hands. "What's that?" She instinctively folded it. "Nothing. Just something of my father's." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Let me see it." "No," her voice was firmer than she expected. Something flickered across his face, anger, but also something deeper. "Secrets will destroy you in this world, Elena." She bit her lip, her pulse racing. "Or maybe they're the only thing keeping me alive." The silence between them was heavy. Richard's jaw tightened, but he didn't push further. Instead, he said quietly, almost reluctantly, "If you ever doubt me, ask me, not the ghosts of your past." And then he left her standing there, torn between fear and trust. The first touch of trust. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She wandered into the library, where the city lights spilled through the tall windows. To her surprise, Richard was there too, sitting in the dim glow of a single lamp, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. "You're awake," he said without looking at her. "So are you," she replied softly, moving closer. He finally met her eyes. For once, his walls looked thin, fragile, even. Without thinking, Elena sat beside him. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable but intimate. Slowly, cautiously, she rested her hand on his. Richard stiffened, then, to her shock, he didn't pull away. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she whispered. His gray eyes searched hers, and for the briefest moment, the mask slipped. She saw exhaustion, grief, loneliness buried beneath the armor. Then he covered her hand with his, firm and steady. "Neither do you." The simple exchange said more than words ever could. The foreshadowing. But as Elena drifted to sleep later that night, the letter haunted her. Her father's warning echoed in her mind. "Trust no one, not even those who claim to save you." And though Richard's hand had been warm, though his defenses had cracked, a cold seed of doubt had been planted in her heart. Her father's warning, "Trust no one, not even those who claim to save you," echoed like a ghost at every glance Richard gave her, every unexpected kindness he showed. And then, as though fate wanted to twist the knife deeper, Veronica struck. The betrayal. One afternoon, Elena was leaving a gallery she'd been visiting when Veronica appeared, heels clicking against the marble floor. Her smile was sweet poison. "Little Mrs. Hale," Veronica drawled, linking her arm through Elena's as if they were friends. "How's married life? Still pretending it's anything more than a contract?" Elena stiffened. "What do you want?" Veronica's smile sharpened. "Just to enlighten you. Poor darling, you think Richard married you out of some misplaced kindness? No, sweetheart. He did it because your father's debts gave him leverage. He owns you." "That's not true," Elena snapped, though her chest tightened. Veronica slipped a folded document into Elena's hand. "Why don't you read this? It's your father's original debt contract. Signed, sealed, and transferred to Richard Hale. Everything was orchestrated long before you walked down that aisle." Elena's breath faltered. "You're lying." "Am I?" Veronica's eyes glittered. "Ask him yourself. But be warned, darling, he'll never admit it. Men like Richard Hale only know how to control, never to love." Then she walked away, leaving Elena trembling in the cold shadow of doubt. Confrontation. That night, Elena stormed into Richard's study. He looked up from his desk, brows furrowed. "What's wrong?" She threw the paper onto his desk. "You tell me." Richard froze, his jaw tightening as he scanned the document. Slowly, he set it down. "Where did you get this?" "It doesn't matter." Her voice cracked. "Is it true? Did you marry me just to settle a debt?" His silence was answer enough. Elena felt her heart shatter. "So everything, the walks, the coffee, the way you looked at me, it was all part of your power play?" "No," his voice was low, urgent. "It started as a contract, yes. I won't lie about that. But it's not what it became." Tears burned her eyes. "Then what did it become, Richard? Because all I see is a man who caged me the way my father warned me he would." Richard's expression hardened, not with anger but with pain. "Your father was drowning in debt. He begged me to protect you in the only way I could, by binding you to me. But what he didn't know was that he stopped, his voice breaking for the first time. "That I would fall in love with you." Elena's breath caught. "You, what?" His eyes were raw, stripped of every wall. "I love you, Elena. And I hate myself for not telling you sooner. You were never just a debt to me. You're the only thing that's made my life mean something." But the wound was too deep, the betrayal too fresh. Elena shook her head, backing away. "I don't know if I can believe you." And then she ran. The breaking point. Elena disappeared for 2 days. Richard scoured the city, furious with himself, sick with fear. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, hurt, broken, because of his silence. When he finally found her, she was at the old church where she used to volunteer, sitting alone in the pews. "Elena," he said softly, his footsteps echoing. She turned, her eyes red from crying. "Why couldn't you just tell me the truth?" "Because I was a coward," Richard admitted. "I thought if I kept control, if I kept my distance, I wouldn't ruin the only good thing I've ever had. But distance didn't protect me, it destroyed us." Elena's voice trembled. "Do you know what it feels like, Richard? To think the only reason someone loves you is because they own you." He stepped closer, kneeling in front of her like a man stripped of all pride. "Then let me prove to you that I don't own you. Not anymore." He reached into his coat and pulled out a document. Elena frowned, taking it. Her eyes widened as she read, the deed of release. Every debt, every claim her father had left, erased. "I've burned the ledger," Richard said quietly. "You owe me nothing. You are free, Elena. Free to walk away from me forever, if that's what you choose." Her hands shook as she held the paper. "Why would you do this?" His gray eyes locked on hers, raw with vulnerability. Because love without freedom isn't love, it's a prison. And I'd rather lose you than keep you that way. The choice. Silence hung heavy in the air. Elena's heart ached as she stared at him, this man who had built walls so high, now kneeling before her in ruins. Slowly, she reached out, touching his cheek. "You're an infuriating, stubborn man, Richard Hale. But do you know what's worse?" His breath caught. "What?" "That I love you too." Her voice broke on the words, but they were true. "Even when I hated you, even when I doubted you, I loved you. And maybe I always will." Richard closed his eyes, a shuddering breath escaping him. And then he pulled her into his arms, holding her as though the world might vanish. For the first time, Elena didn't feel like a debt. She felt like a choice. The wedding that mattered. Weeks later, beneath a sky streaked with spring sunlight, Richard and Elena stood again before an altar. But this time there were no contracts, no debts, no hidden agendas. Just vows. "I promise," Richard said, his voice steady, "to love you freely, not because I own you, but because you are the only one my heart has ever chosen." Tears slid down Elena's cheeks as she whispered, "And I promise to love you, not because I owe you, but because you've shown me what love really means." When their lips met, the kiss was nothing like their first wedding. It was real, binding not by paper but by the fierce, unshakable truth of their hearts. The guests erupted in applause, but all Elena heard was Richard's heartbeat, strong and steady against her own. Epilogue. No more chains. Months later, Elena sat on the balcony of their home, sketching the skyline again. This time, Richard wasn't watching from a distance. He sat beside her, his arm draped around her shoulders. "What are you drawing now?" he asked. She smiled, showing him the page, a sketch of them together, silhouetted against the city lights. "Us," she said simply. Richard kissed her temple. "Then it's the only masterpiece that matters." And as the night embraced them, Elena knew her father's debts had once chained her. But love, true, hard-won love, had set her free. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Until we meet again in the next story, take care and keep the magic of imagination alive.